Alright, so in this video I'm going to quick show you how to set up Metamation for metimating a sheet. You're going to click on DXF. You're going to click on the sheet. We're going to do 7 gauge. Double click on that. These settings here you do not have to mess with 99% of the time, but I'll quickly run on what they do. This button here will highlight any errors that are in the sheet in the drawing. There's lines that are not connected, parts that are overlapping. You'll see it on the highlight of the solid lines. You don't ever need to change these here. You want to, I'll make sure you have ignore layers on. Convert white to black, make it easier to see. You want to have remove duplicate lines on. And you want source nodes that are closer than 0.002 on. You can hit OK. This will be an automatic OK. You never touch anything with this. The next settings are your sheet settings. So all of this can be gotten off of the cheat sheet that I have written down. But for this situation, we're going to use steel. There will always be 8, and this stands for nitrogen. So we're going to go to our sheet thickness. For 7 gauge mild steel, you want to use high speed, unless you are programming forge, which we will go over later. High speed. These settings here, these are your basic settings. This is your sheet settings. You do not want to change these margins unless you are trying to fit something on a sheet. These margins are here to avoid the head hitting the stops on the sheet. The sheet stops will knock the head off if you change this margin here at all. So you have your sheet size on here. That should auto-populate because I have all the material database in there, which I'll go over in another video. There's no clamps, so you can ignore these. These here, so it will, by default, when it can, bring your pierce point to the lower right portion here. For outer shapes, for inner shapes, it will bring it to the lower right when it can. Circles, it will go to the right. Your cut direction, you want your outer cut to be clockwise, your inner cut to be counterclockwise. You want to have retain all nodes of polyline off. Convert tangent approach to 90 degrees. And don't do this conversion of a line corner. Those should be on and off respectively. Your pierce type has to be pierced. Do not have any other alternate. It needs to be standard pierce. You are not going to do any special pierces, so we'll do none on that one. Your lead-in, your standard lead-in will be 0.2. You can adjust this as needed. If you have parts that are pretty close together, you know, you might have a part that's a 1/4 inch apart. Your lead-in could almost hit that part. You can feel free to drop that down, and I will show you how to do that as we metamate. But that can be good all the way down to 0. You want to have the angle to span approach line and radius selected on. It will try to avoid hitting another part with a pierce if possible. Corner processing. So this is a option that we don't use. Would not recommend ever using. And the only time I would say this might be an option is if you are cutting a 1/2 inch, 3/4, 1 inch contract job where you can space your parts out a lot. You can change these to a loop on like a 90-degree cut. So basically what it does is when it makes this 90-degree, let's use this as an example. When it makes this 90-degree, instead of making a sharp turn, it'll come out and down, loop around, and come up this way. So basically, instead of having to make that sharp corner, it can take a loop right here and go up, which allows it to not have to make that sharp turn. And the speed, when it tries to make it at full speed, it can cause it to spray right here and not cut through very cleanly. Wouldn't recommend doing that. And I'll make a video about thicker material metamating as well. I don't want to drag this out. I don't have to. Ignore all of these. Don't need to mess with any of this stuff here. Um, leave this off. The auto tool settings. So, generate tooling needs to be all entities. No shared sheet. Do not suppress escape. Do not suppress approach. Ever. You can suppress corner process unless you decided to use it as a corner like we had talked about up here. Suppress automatic edge control, suppress tooling for points, suppress wire jumps, suppress stitch cut, and process edge and corner notches first. You want your default to be use this cutting condition right here. This needs to be your default. You do not want any of these to be your default. I'll show why later. Ignore your reposition settings. You don't need to change anything. You can look here what's selected and what isn't. This needs to be the default. This also needs to be the default. This will sequence your bend or your cuts starting at the bottom left, and it will sequence it in this general direction. That allows the sheet to stay cool. It keeps it from cutting all of the parts in a line, which can heat the sheet up. Always sort individual piece by piece. Do not do all piercing at first. You want all usable holes in this part or wire joining to be off, circle holes to be off, and random sort for holes to be off. Route traverse lines. This is your standard default. Don't ever change this. So here is your original option to start, and I'm going to do this on a separate video. So that should be it for the standard setup.